The early morning was shrouded in thick fog, and the empty streets of a small town in the American heartland seemed to hold their breath. 3 in the morning was a time when secret promises came to life, and it was in this heavy silence that Emma parked the car, feeling her heart beat faster. The arrangement was simple, to meet him in that forgotten spot, far from eyes and judgment. But as she approached, she realized she wasn't alone. A motionless silhouette, partially illuminated by the broken streetlight, was already waiting for her. It wasn't the man she'd expected, and in that instant, a chill ran down her spine, as if she'd been pushed into a carefully laid trap. The stranger stepped forward, revealing only part of his face, and said her name in a slow voice laden with something Emma couldn't quite place. Not anger, not tenderness, but something in between, like someone holding a dangerous secret. In the background, a metallic clang echoed, as if something had been deliberately dropped. She tried to look around, but the man moved quickly, blocking her view. And then, almost knowingly, he whispered, "He's not coming, and you need to know why." In that instant, Emma understood that everything she believed about that night was about to be shattered, and that his presence there would change not just that encounter, but the course of her entire life. To continue watching my videos, like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with everything. That happens here on the channel. The city slept under the weight of a silence that seemed ancient, as if woven over decades of hidden secrets. That forgotten spot, at the intersection of 2 nameless streets, had the strange ability to feel colder than the rest of the city, even on warm summer nights. Emma parked the car there, her hands still firmly on the steering wheel, as if the pressure of her fingers could keep at bay the doubts that were beginning to build in her mind. The clock on the pool dashboard read 2:57 a.m., only 3 minutes until the meeting she had waited for weeks, a meeting that, in her heart, could change everything. Not that she was sure she wanted that change, but she needed it. Ever since that man had come into her life, at a time when she felt broken and lost, Emma had discovered a side of herself she had never dared explore. He was the risk she shouldn't take, but also the promise of something that could save her from a life that no longer belonged to her. The passenger seat still held the coat he'd forgotten during their last encounter, permeated with a scent that reminded her of the feeling of being alive again. However, that early morning, there was something different in the air. The car's headlights cast a pale beam over the empty road, and amid the fog, a shadow loomed, barely discernible. Emma glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, it seemed as if something was moving in the darkness behind her, but there was no sound other than the nervous ticking of her internal clock. When the hand reached 3, she took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and pushed open the door to leave. The cool early morning air bit her skin, and the damp asphalt reflected a soft glow, as if the entire night had been waiting for this moment. She took a few steps, searching for the familiar silhouette. But then she realized she wasn't alone, and the person watching her wasn't who she expected to see. Emma's first reaction was instinctive, to take a step back. Not because the figure before her seemed threatening in any obvious sense, but because there was something about that presence that deeply disturbed her. The person stood at the edge of the light, cast by the broken street lamp, as if precisely calculating how much of it could be seen. His hands were in the pockets of his long coat, his body leaning slightly forward, and the silence. A silence so thick she could almost hear her own heartbeat reverberating in her head. Instinct screamed. Had her to get back in the car, turn the key and drive away, but something in the shadow's fixed gaze kept her grounded. When the man took the first step toward her, the light revealed part of his face, enough for Emma to realize she'd never seen him before, but at the same time she sensed that somehow he already knew who she was. "Emma." His voice was deep, almost drawled, and carried a tone that blended intimacy and menace. She felt a chill crawl up the back of her neck. He didn't ask who. Didn't ask for confirmation. He said her name like someone who had repeated it 100 times in their own mind. For a moment, doubt pierced her breath. Had she been followed? The man stepped closer, and when his eyes met hers, Emma noticed a detail that made her shiver. There was a wound on his eyebrow, fresh as if it had been inflicted that night. "He won't show up," the stranger said with unsettling calm. "And if I knew why, I wouldn't be here." Emma tried to take a step back, but the asphalt beneath her feet felt like she was trapped. The man looked away for a second, as if making sure no one else was watching, and then he pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket, holding it out to her. "You need to see this before it's too late." His hand trembled slightly, but his gaze remained unwavering, fixed on hers, as if he knew that from the moment she touched that paper, there would be no turning back. In the distance, a metallic sound echoed, a tin lid hitting the ground, or perhaps something else. Emma turned quickly, but found only the empty street. When she looked back, she realized the man was closer, almost within arm's reach. The smell of smoke and rain hung between them. "If you trust him after seeing this, you will pay the same price I paid." The words hung heavy in the air before he dropped the envelope in her hand and retreated into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Emma stood there motionless, her heart racing, feeling as if the early morning chill was now coming from within. The envelope burned in her hand, not from the heat, but from the certainty that it contained something that could destroy more than just a forbidden relationship. It could tear away the mask of everything she thought she knew about that night. Emma didn't open the envelope right away. She held it in her palm for a few seconds, as if the weight were more than the paper could bear. The paper was damp at the edges, marked by hurried fingers, and a faint smell of tobacco and rain wafted up as she peeled back the flap. Inside were 3 old photographs, a crumpled receipt from a motel off the interstate, an urgently written note, and a cheap flash drive, the kind that gets lost in the bottom of any pocket. The first photo made Emma's stomach turn. The man she'd been waiting for at 3, Daniel, appeared in profile, in a dimly lit parking lot similar to this one, speaking to the same figure who'd approached her, both of them staring. Off-screen. In the second, Daniel was entering room 12 of a roadside motel. The date stamp in the corner indicated the previous night, almost the same time as their scheduled meeting. In the third, the most gruesome, he was sitting on the bed, head down, one hand covering his eyes, and the other holding a styrofoam cup, as if the weight of something invisible was crushing him. The receipt confirmed it. Cash payment, no name, no card number. The note, in shaky handwriting, read, "If you think you know what you love, ask yourself what it hides when love demands payment." The question pierced Emma like a nail. She wanted to tear everything apart, throw the photos into the puddle, deny what she saw, but reason began to align the pieces she'd tried to keep separate. The late replied messages, his disappearance for a few hours with poorly worded apologies, the forgotten coat that didn't smell like him that night, as if it had come from somewhere else. The flash drive seemed like an invitation to the abyss. The fog thickened, an insistent cricket broke the silence, and Emma looked around with the feeling of being watched. She tucked the photos into her coat, folded the note like someone closing a wound, and felt the plastic of the flash drive scratch her fingertips. There was no way to see it there, but she knew that once plugged into any laptop, it would have a voice of its own. And that was when her phone vibrated. An unknown number, no photo, no name. She answered with her heart in her throat, and on the other end came a pent-up breath before a sentence. "You got the envelope." It was the same voice. "He didn't ask," he stated. Emma swallowed hard, trying to regain some leverage she didn't have. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The answer came out smaller, as if it were a confession. "I want you to decide before he decides for you." A noise, perhaps of cars in the distance, cut the line for a second. "Daniel isn't who you think. He promised to come, but he promised me first, and he didn't keep it." The sentence hung laden with old resentment. "I know how it sounds, but the truth doesn't have to sound pretty to be true." The line dropped. Emma recognized a thread of anger rising within her, anger at being manipulated, at being pushed into a defenseless verdict. Still, her mind raced to places she'd avoided. Who was this person to know about the meeting? Why the wound on her eyebrow? What did "he promised me first" mean? The dashboard clock read 3:07 a.m. Daniel's lateness, which on other nights would have been excusable, now seemed premeditated. Karma, A word she associated with other lives, with invisible balances, surged like a silent tide. Perhaps there were no coincidences, only debts that found their time to be collected. Emma ran her thumb along the edge of the note and noticed on the back a dark brown stain that wasn't coffee. Beside it, a nearly faded word. Auction. Room 12, the motel, the photo of the hunched man. Everything took on the contours of a story she didn't know. An old memory, her mother saying that no one arrives at 3 in the morning without bringing with them what they're running from, cut her to the core. A car's headlights streaked across the street at the corner and disappeared, like a timid reminder that the world still existed beyond that night. Emma tucked the flash drive into her coat's inner pocket, grabbed her keys, and as she returned to the car, felt her skin change temperature, as if crossing an invisible boundary. The seat still held his coat, and she pressed it against her face for a second, searching for a familiar place to breathe. The fabric, however, carried a strange scent, like cheap detergent, betraying a hasty, reckless wash that erased traces rather than cleaned. She started the engine but didn't drive off. She stood there, the fuel gauge dipping imperceptibly, wondering what she would see when she plugged in the flash drive and if there would be any return after. The first image. Looking up, she noticed a figure crossing the street ahead. It wasn't Daniel, but he walked purposefully, as if he were finishing what he started. Emma kept her hands on the steering wheel, but didn't turn the key to move forward. The rhythmic sound of that figure's footsteps echoed down the narrow street, each beat on the asphalt mixing with the rapid beat of her heart. The fog seemed to part for him, gradually revealing a face that held no explicit threat, but a cold, almost surgical determination. He wore a simple hat pulled forward and a grey coat that fluttered slightly in the wind. As he approached the illuminated area, Emma noticed he was carrying something in his hand, a folded sheaf of papers held together by a rubber band. When he caught her eye, he stopped, tilting his head to the side, like someone assessing the condition of a wounded animal before deciding whether to approach. He said nothing. He simply held up the sheaf, displaying it as if it were proof. That needed no words. Emma felt the thin air. She didn't want to open the door, but she knew that if she didn't, the scene would repeat itself until he did. She took a deep breath and got out of the car, keeping a safe distance. The man held out the papers. He's not who he says he is, and you're not the first. The words fell like stones on the calm surface of a lake, sending ripples of discomfort that spread to places Emma didn't want to revisit. She held the bundle hesitantly, but the rough texture of the paper betrayed old copies, documents already handled by many hands. At the top was a purchase and sale agreement, signed by Daniel, dated 5 years ago, involving a woman's name Emma had never heard. Leafing through, she found bank statements, with regular deposits of large sums from an account in Arizona. Between the pages were more recent photos, Daniel standing next to a blonde woman and a child of about 7 at an amusement park. His smile was different, less restrained, as if there were nothing to hide. Emma felt her stomach tighten, and her voice faltered as she asked, "Who are they?" The man simply replied, "The ones he returns to when he's finished playing." The cold wind blew across the street, carrying with it a scrap of old newspaper that tangled in Emma's car tire, making an irritating noise. She wanted to believe there was some plausible explanation, that it was all a misunderstanding fabricated by someone with ulterior motives. But each new piece fell into place too cruelly to be coincidence. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man sighed, looking away into the darkness behind her. "Because I've been in your shoes, and because when he arrives he'll deny everything. He'll cry, he'll promise, and you'll want to believe, but if you do, you'll bear the same scars I bear." The sentence hung in the air, accompanied by a silence that seemed to weigh more heavily than any sound. Emma realized that despite the urge to defend herself, a part of her already believed. The man stepped back, shoving his hands in his pockets. "You don't have to decide now, but don't delay." Without waiting for an answer, he turned and disappeared into the fog, leaving her alone with the stack of papers and a growing lump in her throat. The cold seemed to come from within, as if her skin, blood, and even her bones were reacting to the discovery. Emma got back into the car, tossed her documents onto the passenger seat, and stared at the hazy horizon, feeling like the night had become a minefield, and that the next step might be the last before everything exploded. The headlights appeared first, a sliver of light in the fog, coming toward her, too slow to be coincidence. Emma felt her entire body stiffen as she recognized the outline of Daniel's car. The engine purred low, almost lazy, as if he were in no hurry to arrive, or as if he already knew the delay wouldn't be the worst part of the night. She kept her hands firm on the steering wheel but didn't start the car. She watched him park a few feet ahead, leaving the passenger door aligned with hers. He got out, his dark coat zipped up to his neck, his hair slightly damp, perhaps from the fog, perhaps from a recent shower. The smile she'd tried to muster died before it could take shape, replaced by a quick glance that swept the street, as if searching for something or someone. "You're here," he said, his tone more like relief than surprise. Emma didn't respond. Her eyes fell for a moment on the passenger seat, where the sheaf of papers and the envelope seemed to pulse with their very presence. Daniel followed her gaze and noticed. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "What is this?" he asked, a hint of hardness already in his voice. Emma took a deep breath, her hands still on the steering wheel. "Things they gave me before you arrived." "Who?" He took a step forward, his tone lower, as if the question were also an accusation. "Someone who seemed to know too much about you, and about us." Daniel looked to the side, bit his lower lip, and let out a short, humorless laugh. "So that's it," he murmured, as if he'd just encountered an invisible enemy. "What did they show you?" Emma hesitated. The urge to throw everything at him and demand answers, mixed with the fear of hearing confirmations she couldn't bear. Photos, documents, a child. The silence fell heavy, as thick as fog. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, as if searching for strength, and when he opened them there was a damp glow there. But it wasn't just sadness. There was also something calculating, controlling. "You know you can't believe everything that appears in the dark," he said, his voice almost soft, slowly approaching. "I came here for you, not for lies." Emma smelled his familiar scent, but now mixed with something metallic, cold. "So tell me." Her voice trailed off, before finding its firmness. "Who is she? And the child?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another step, until his shadow covered half of her face. "It's not that simple." The sentence escaped like a breath, laden with something that seemed to beg not to be revealed. Emma realized the answer she expected wouldn't come easily, and that perhaps he had come here not to explain, but to prevent her from discovering the truth on her own. The weight of karma, silent and inevitable, hung between them, ready to fall on whoever dared break the implicit pact of that night. Daniel leaned in, as if the proximity could undo what the papers had woven between them, and adopted the tone he always used when he wanted her to relax. Low, warm, almost a promise. He said he could explain that it was all a setup by someone intent on destroying him, that the woman in the photos was part of a complicated past, and the child was not what she seemed. Emma realized the words came with measured pauses, the kind of silence that is unnatural but measured. She kept her jaw firm, and for a second she thought she could hold his gaze without wavering. Then she remembered the scent of the too hastily washed coat and the note with the word auction smeared on the back. She asked what that meant. Daniel looked away. The muscle in his jaw twitched again, and he answered too quickly, as if he already had the phrase ready. It was a charity event, a yard sale. Nothing important. The nothing important hit her like a shove. In the United States, everyone knew the correct name for things. When someone changed the term or oversimplified, it was because they were trying to hide the sharp edge. Emma felt her skin crawl. He held out his hand, asking for the photos, and the gesture was gentle on the outside, but urgent on the inside. She shrugged, taking a step back, and the sound of her heels scraping against the asphalt seemed too loud. Daniel took a half step back, took a deep breath, changed strategy. He suggested they get in the car, drive to the all-night diner off County Road, strong coffee, bright lights, people nearby, a public place where she could feel safe. He was convincing. He always was. But Emma realized the rush wasn't to protect her. She was trying to shift the scene, remove from the street what the street itself revealed. The delay, the envelope, the injured man who had approached her first. A distant hum, perhaps a police car crossing another avenue, pierced the night and disappeared. Emma shifted her body, as if searching for roots in the ground. She said she wouldn't go anywhere without hearing the truth right then and there. Daniel smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes, and then, slowly, he began to reveal small crumbs. He mentioned old debts, a partner who had become an enemy, warehouses bought at auction, cash deposits to avoid taxes, an account in Arizona that, according to him, isn't what you think. As he spoke, he shifted position, drawing small circles around her. He wasn't touching her, but occupying the space, rewriting the air. Emma realized that somewhere he had slipped into the story in the wrong tense. He spoke of when the girl got sick before saying he didn't know her. The incoherence flashed like a brake light, and then, for a moment, his gaze fell on the inside pocket of her coat, and his face stiffened for a split second. The flash drive. Emma held the material in her left hand, a tiny gesture Daniel noticed. He raised both hands to chest height, theatrically calm, and said it was stolen, edited, dangerous material, that there were people capable of doing anything to recover it. The word recover weighed heavily. The wind carried the damp smell of earth, and a shiver ran through the street. Emma, who had been trying to keep her voice low, felt a surge of courage surge through her. She asked if the injury to the other man's eyebrow was related to him, and why someone would come at 3 in the morning to deliver evidence if there wasn't an agreement Daniel had failed to fulfill. The question hung in the balance. He pressed his lips together, abandoning his calm, letting impatience seep through. He said things had gotten out of hand, that Cole, that's how the name slipped out, hadn't accepted being left behind, that the motel had been a forced reunion to close a cycle. The word forced opened another window. Emma asked if close meant paying or keeping quiet. Daniel didn't answer. He moved closer, and his shadow swallowed hers. He said he loved Emma, that everything he'd done, all the shortcuts, was to build a path that fit them both. The sentence hit her heart like rain on glass, noise without penetration. Only then did he ask, for the first time without maneuvering, that she hand over the flash drive, so no one gets hurt. His face open, his voice almost broken. Emma felt the pain. On another night, she would have given in. But calmer, silent, arranged the pieces into lines that could no longer be undone. She said no. Daniel breathed as if on impulse, and his right hand moved forward reflexively, not violently but quickly. The coat shifted. The flash drive hit her palm and slipped, falling to the asphalt with a dull click, rolling a little, glinting in the dim light of the street lamp. They both looked up at the same time. The sound of another pair of footsteps emerged from the fog, coming from behind the car. It wasn't her imagination. Someone was approaching, as if dawn was finally calling back the debts that had been postponed. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, each beat echoing in the silent street as if coming from much closer than it should have. Daniel turned first, his body stiffening, and Emma used the second of distraction to snatch the flash drive from the ground, closing it in her hand so tightly that she felt the plastic edge mark her skin. From the fog emerged the same silhouette she'd seen earlier, the man with the wound in his eyebrow, but now with his face more visible, illuminated by the uneven reflection of the street lamp. His eyes held something between exhaustion and urgency, and his breathing seemed heavier. He walked to a stop a few meters away, staring at Daniel with an expression that needed no translation. This was no casual reunion. Daniel took a step forward almost instinctively, positioning himself between Emma and the other man. "Did you come to finish what you started?" he said, his tone low but full of venom. The man smirked humorlessly. "No, I came to finish what you left half-finished." Emma felt the air tighten between them, as if the street were too small to contain the tension. Daniel took another step forward, and the other did the same, until they were less than a meter apart. "You shouldn't have brought her into this," the man said, his eyes flicking to Emma and then back to Daniel. "She has nothing to do with your debts, doesn't she?" Daniel laughed shortly, a cold sound. "She's the only one who has anything to do with this." Emma realized she didn't fully understand, but felt the weight of the sentence like a blow. "What is he talking about?" he asked, his voice sounding firmer than he expected. The two men ignored him. The stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, glinting in the light. It wasn't a gun, but a dark metal key with signs of wear. "You know what this opens," he said, holding the key up to his face. "And you know that if I want, I can give it to you." Daniel held out his hand, his body tense, but the man stepped back, protecting the key. Not without her seeing it first. Emma felt their eyes turn to her, as if she were the centerpiece of a board game he'd never asked to play. "What's in that key?" she asked, but no answers came. Daniel broke eye contact and said, almost in a whisper, as if stalling for time, "This won't end well for anyone." The man approached her slowly and held out the key. "It will end for whoever lied." His eyes searched hers, as if trying to establish her trust once and for all. Emma hesitated. She felt that any choice here was final. Daniel stepped forward to stop her, but the stranger was quicker and locked the key in her hand. "If you want to know who he really is, put this in the lock of the shed on Route 27. You'll find more than you're prepared for." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Daniel grabbed Emma's arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to keep her trapped. "Don't go," he said, and the words carried a different weight, almost pleading. Emma looked at him and for an instant saw not the man she'd loved, but someone cornered, ready to sacrifice anything to save himself. In the distant sound of an engine cut through the dawn, slowly growing, as if something more were about to arrive. Emma realized the night still had layers to reveal, and that karma, patient, was just waiting for the right time to exact its due. Emma didn't respond to Daniel's request. She simply closed her hand over the key and walked toward the car, as if her body knew what to do before her mind gave the go-ahead. The stranger, the man with the wound, didn't try to stop her. He simply took a step back, as if understanding that the truth must be discovered by those who will carry it. Daniel called her name, his voice breaking through the fog with an urgency that mixed fear and control. She didn't turn her head. The engine started with a short roar, and the streetlights streaked across the glass as Emma rounded the first curve onto Route 27. The radio, forgotten on a news station, hissed with static and then went silent, leaving only the sound of the engine and her shallow, disciplined breathing. In the rearview mirror, two headlights appeared low, close together. Daniel was following her. There was no way to lose him without turning this into a dangerous game, so Emma maintained a safe speed, her hands steady, her eyes scanning the roadside dotted with warehouses, shuttered repair shops, and 24-hour eateries that shimmered like mirages. The worn RTE-27 storage and supply sign appeared on the right, preceded by a chain-link fence and an empty guardhouse. Emma drove in slowly, tires crunching on gravel, and parked in front of a row of numbered metal doors. The cold there felt different, smelling of old dust and spilled oil. Daniel stopped a few feet away, got out of the car too quickly, and walked toward her with his hands open in a gesture of peace. "Don't do that," he said more quietly, less in control of his tone than usual. "Anything in there will hurt you more than it will hurt me." The attempt at protection sounded like a misplaced warning. Emma lifted the key, scanned the metal for the number, and walked to the corresponding door. The lock resisted the first turn, as if it too demanded a final decision. The second, it gave way with a click. Daniel took a step forward. "I'll explain," he promised, and the word promise gleamed like a blade without a sheath. Emma lifted the metal door, the metalwork creaking loudly in the early morning, and a smell of stored paper rose from the darkness. The old switch flickered twice before turning on a yellow bulb, which cast light over metal shelves, file boxes, a small safe in the corner, and in the center, a simple table with objects lined up with almost obsessive discipline. Manila envelopes labeled with women's names, An analog clock stopped at exactly 3, an old camera, a set of numbered keys, and a thick, black-covered notebook with the word Lottes handwritten on it. Emma's stomach tightened. The meticulous organization had the cruelty of systems that leave no room for doubt. She approached the table and read the labels. Jenna, 3 woos. Marisol, 3 woos. Avery, 3 woos. The pattern hit her like a dull blow. 3 in the morning. Promises scheduled at the same time, like a secret routine. On the second shelf, a clear plastic box held rings, pendants, memories that didn't belong to a single body. And on the lid, a child's drawing of a sun and 2 figures holding hands, crayon scribbles with a name written crookedly in the corner. Emma recognized the park from the photos by the green Ferris wheel and felt her eyes burn. Daniel breathed in beside her, very close. "I'd keep it to return," he said, stumbling over syllables as if improvising with every step. "These are things found at auctions, storage auctions. I buy what people abandon. Sometimes I find letters, jewelry, photos. I try to find the owners." The explanation possible was too polite. Emma opened the notebook. The pages contained columns of dates, lot numbers, auction values, and in the margin, notes with initials and arrows that, added together, formed a map of relationships. In several entries, the mark 03 Ursu appeared circular like a stamp. Further back, on another table, a closed notebook rested next to a card reader and a box of labeled external hard drives. The flash drive in the inner pocket suddenly weighed heavily, as if it were a magnet to it all. Her heart leaped when, turning another page, she found her own name written in pencil, smaller, in parentheses next to a lot number. Not Emma, but the name of the cafe where they met, underlined twice, followed by 03 Gast. Her skin froze despite the warm lamp. "Why is this here?" The question came out shaky, but firm enough to stand on its own. Daniel took a while to answer. She swallowed, rubbed her forehead, and deflected a sideways reply. He talked about coincidences, about how he compulsively wrote everything down, about patterns that help you remember. Each word piled up, built a wall between them. Emma realized painfully that no matter how hard she tried, she would never return to the point before that open notebook. The echo of her own footsteps on the cement floor sounded behind her, and for a moment she thought it was the stranger. But it was just the door slamming in the wind. The headlights outside cast shadows that rose and fell on the walls. Emma opened one of the envelopes. Inside, a never-sent letter, a bus ticket, a deposit slip, and a photograph of a woman crying beside a cardboard box, as if she had just lost something too large for her arms. The word auction appeared again, this time on a stapled pamphlet with the date and address. Coincidence became the axis. Karma, silent, connected the dots, promises made by the 3 of them, encounters that seemed like love, but were transactions, returns that came with unfathomable interest. Emma closed the envelope carefully, like someone returning a body to its resting place, and took a breath. "You didn't find me," she said, turning to Daniel. "You took me." The sentence wasn't shouted. It came out low, but it filled the air in the warehouse. Daniel took a step and stretched out his hand, pleading wordlessly. "It's not that," he tried, his voice scratchy. With you it was different." Emma felt a tear fall, not for him, but for the version of herself she believed would be the exception. She put the notebook back on the table, and without taking her eyes off Daniel, reached into her bag, took out the flash drive, and placed it on top of the closed laptop. Then, let's see together what different means. Outside, an unfamiliar engine entered the courtyard and died, leaving a silence even heavier than before. Someone was coming, and it wasn't just the past. The sound of the engine faded, but the crunch of tires on gravel still echoed in Emma's memory. She glanced at Daniel, who kept his eyes fixed on the warehouse door as if trying to calculate how many seconds remained before the approaching figure crossed the threshold. The air was thicker, and even the yellowish light seemed to hesitate, blinking 3 times before stabilizing. The footsteps began slow, rhythmic, each heavier than the last. Emma felt her skin crawl as if the concrete itself vibrated beneath her feet. Daniel moved first, closing the distance to the door. Slightly, his body leaning forward ready to intercept whoever entered. Emma couldn't tell if it was protection or control. The doorknob creaked, and the man with the eyebrow wound entered, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, a second man, taller, with a military haircut and an impassive expression, held a small leather briefcase. Their presence made the space shrink. The first spoke, ignoring Daniel. "I thought you wouldn't have the courage to open it." Emma tightened her fingers around. The key, still warm from the previous contact, but remained still. The tall man placed the folder on the table next to the notebook and opened it with a sharp click. Inside were photos printed on thick paper, much clearer than the ones in the original envelope, and a signed contract. Emma immediately recognized the same name that was on several of the papers: Cole Atwood. The injured man pointed at Daniel. "He told you I wanted money. It wasn't money. It was my life back." Emma looked at Daniel, whose jaw was clenched. "And her?" the man asked, nodding toward her. "Where does she fit in?" Daniel hesitated, and the silence was enough for the answer to suggest itself. The tall man pulled another document from the folder and placed it in front of Emma. It was a storage unit auction record, Lot 2703, personal contents, price $450. Beside it, in firm handwriting, was her name. Not her legal name, but the nickname Daniel had used from the beginning, as if the baptism of their intimacy had come from an auction bid. Emma felt her throat close, but her voice came out firm. "You knew who I was before you met me?" Daniel tried to move closer, but the wounded man interposed, his body erect like a barrier. "He knew everything. The address, your mother's name, even the school where you went to school." "And why?" Emma asked, the question shooting out like an arrow. Daniel took a deep breath, looked at her with a mixture of pity and pleading. "Because I needed someone who wasn't tied down, someone who could start from scratch." "You wanted someone easy to abandon," she replied, without raising her voice, but with such a precise cut that it made Daniel take a step back. The tall man slammed the folder shut, the sound reverberating off the metal of the desk. "Enough talking," he said, and looked directly at Emma. "That flash drive you have, it's the last one left. If it burns, history is erased. If you open it, no one will sleep peacefully again." Emma looked at the small object on the laptop, and for the first time felt the weight of a decision that involved not only her life, but the lives of everyone orbiting that secret. Karma was there, invisible, waiting for the choice that would balance the scales. In the background, a siren began to echo distantly, slowly growing louder, approaching like a countdown to something inevitable. Daniel broke the silence. "Emma, please, don't put that in." But her hand was already on the flash drive. She looked at him one last time, and in her eyes there was neither anger nor love, only the cold clarity of someone who understands that, for certain debts, the only possible repayment is total exposure. Emma held the flash drive between her fingers as if it weighed tons, feeling the cold, uneven texture of the plastic, each groove etched like a map to a decision with no turning back. The siren outside was approaching, but not fast enough for her to use it as an excuse to wait. Daniel took a step forward, but was intercepted by the injured man, who raised his arm and fixed him with a glare. "She decides." The sentence was dry, leaving no room for reply. The tall man closed the warehouse door, the click of the lock echoing like a warning. "No one enters, no one leaves until this is over." Emma pulled up the nearest chair, sat down in front of the laptop, and took a deep breath. Her hand trembled as she inserted the flash drive into the USB port. A sharp sound announced the reading, and the monitor lit up with a white glow displaying folders labeled by date and time. All at 3 a.m., clicking on the first one, images appeared, photos of women, each in different places and times, all with a look Emma recognized. The mix of hope and surrender she herself had initially had with Daniel. Short videos showed meetings arranged on deserted streets, objects exchanged as if they were gifts, but recorded in attached spreadsheets with values next to them, like priced goods. Emma felt her stomach churn, but continued. In one of the folders, her own face appeared. She was smiling, holding his coat the night they met. The image was accompanied by an audio file. Opening it, she heard Daniel's voice describing details about her, her habits, the places she frequented, the cafe where she liked to sit. It was a recording made before their first meeting. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to absorb the full-blown blow. Daniel tried to speak, but the wounded man cut him off with a gesture. "Continue," Emma said, and she obeyed. More folders revealed documents, receipts, and even scanned copies of contracts, all linked to storage auctions and strangers' personal items, but with a pattern: lonely, vulnerable women with stories easily manipulated. The tall man stepped closer and pointed to a more recent video. "This is the one they wanted to delete." His voice was deep, almost solemn. Emma pressed play. The footage showed Daniel and Cole arguing in room 12 of the motel. In the audio, Daniel said that the next batch was already secured, mentioning his own name in a disguised way, but clearly enough for her to understand. Cole threatened to hand over everything if he didn't get his share. The argument ended with Daniel walking out and slamming the door, leaving Cole alone and injured, just as Emma had found him that morning. The siren sounded much closer now. The injured man leaned toward her. "You can save others, or save him." Emma knew that saving him meant keeping. Silent, erasing the flash drive, letting the stories remain buried along with hers, Daniel broke the barrier and knelt beside her, his hands open, his voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you. With you, it was real." But the real, for Emma, didn't erase the method, didn't erase the marks. The karma was there, immense, hanging over the three of them like a sentence awaiting execution. She moved the cursor to the automatic upload to the cloud option. The high man had already turned on the warehouse's Wi-Fi without her noticing. A click and the progress began to climb, 1%, 2%, 3%. Daniel jumped to his feet, but Cole held him tightly, preventing any interference. At 50%, Daniel's screams became a mixture of rage and despair. At 100%, a notification sound confirmed. Now nothing more could be erased. Emma removed the flash drive, put it in her pocket, and closed her laptop with a snap that cut through the air. Outside, the red lights of the police car began to stain the warehouse. Walls. Destiny finally arrived. Red and blue lights swept the warehouse in bands that rose and fell across the metal shelves, painting the boxes with an intermittent glow that seemed to pulse in time with the siren. The door swung open firmly, and two county officers entered, one with his hand on his holster out of protocol, the other with a flashlight that cut through the dust hanging in the air. The glow swept across the notebook, stopped at the clock stuck at 3 GSO, and, in an instinctive movement, returned to Daniel's face, who raised his arms as if trying to freeze time on his own. The injured man remained beside Emma, his breathing controlled, and the tall man stepped forward with practiced calm, slowly pulling a leather wallet from his pocket and displaying a badge for a private investigator licensed in that state. He wasn't a cop, but he wasn't a nameless stranger either. The officer with the flashlight asked for documents, direct questions, his tone professional and undeterred. Who opened the unit? Who had the key? Why were so many people's personal belongings catalogued like that? Emma felt her own voice emerge firmer than expected and recounted the sequence as if navigating a path of already recognized pebbles. The meeting at 3, the man who arrived first, the envelope, the key, the storage, the notebook, the flash drive. He didn't sugarcoat anything. Daniel tried to interrupt, claiming trespassing, claiming a setup, claiming that was part of his job with warehouse auctions, that he held items for return, that everything seemed worse than it was. The flashlight landed on the envelopes marked with identical names and times, then on the rings, kept like trophies from a collection no one had asked for. The officer with the holster noticed the cut on Cole's eyebrow and asked for an explanation. Cole described, without embellishment, the argument in room 12, the broken promise, the shove against the doorframe, the blood that stained the note. with the word auction. Daniel smiled briefly, uncomfortably, and said it was acting that Cole was trying to extort him. When the investigator opened the folder and showed the clear photos of the argument, the signed contract, and the correspondence between dates, lots, and values, Daniel's smile faded to the edge of a muscle. The officer asked for the notebook. Emma hesitated for a second, remembering the completed upload, and then handed it over along with the powerless flash drive. Athiag. Other officer collected the black-covered notebook with the same attention one would gather fragile evidence. He leafed through it, stopped at the page where, in the margin, Emma's last name was underlined, and discreetly looked up at her. There was no judgment in that look, only recognition of the damage. Daniel noticed the focus and, on impulse, advanced to snatch the notebook from the officer's hands. The movement was quick, but the response was even quicker. A curt order, a sideways step, twist of the wrist, and in less than a second Daniel was leaning against the table, palms open, breathing heavily, his voice lost in excuses that no longer found a place. The radio hissed from the officer's shoulder, broken words asking for confirmation of the incident. Possible receiving of personal property, possible auction fraud, possible coercion. Emma felt the phrase, possible coercion, hit her like a cold wind. It wasn't just a romance unraveling, it was an architecture of choices that, at last, revealed its foundation. Cole glanced at her sideways, not in triumph, but with the gravity of someone who knows that justice doesn't restore what time has taken. The tall researcher expertly collected the boxes of external hard drives, pointed out the labels, and showed the officer where the folders with dates and attachments were. In the corner, the clock, stuck at 3 hours, seemed to smile with invisible teeth. When Emma was asked to repeat, calmly and in order, everything she had seen, she heard herself speak the unvarnished truth, each word with the dry texture of something that no longer needs apology. Daniel, handcuffed as a precaution, tried one last tactic. He asked to speak alone, promising that it was real with her, that the story could be told differently, that no one needed to get hurt if the past remained buried. The officer wrote it down without looking up, indifferent to the belated attempt at charm. The flashlight swept around the unit again until it rested on the clock. The officer inclined his head. "Why do all the notes mark this time?" Daniel fell silent. Emma breathed in, her eyes burning, but her voice came softly. "Because 3 o'clock is when promises without witnesses seem easiest." No one answered. The radio announced that another patrol car had arrived at the gate. The echo of footsteps, multiple now, made the concrete vibrate slightly. Outside, the cold dawned before the sun. Emma realized that when she walked through that door, nothing that had brought her here would have the same name. Even so, she put on her coat, felt the weight of the decision settle on her chest like an ancient object, and was the first to say, "I'm ready." Karma didn't shout or demand applause. It simply silently lined up the pieces on the table. The notebook, the 3-hour clock, the names, the exam papers, and amidst it all, a woman who had chosen to no longer be a numbered lot. The air outside felt different, as if each breath were filtered through an invisible layer of decision already made. Emma crossed the gravel courtyard with firm steps, feeling the crackle of the stones beneath her shoes echo in the remaining silence. The sky was beginning to lighten to a bluish grey, and the biting chill of the early morning brought a strange sense of cleansing, as if, despite everything, there was something purifying about the pain that settles after the truth. Cole walked a few steps back, the cut on his eyebrow now dry, almost a premature scar. He didn't say anything, but there was a silent recognition in his gaze, as if they shared an invisible scar that only someone who had been deceived in this way could understand. Daniel, handcuffed and escorted, was placed in the back seat of the patrol car. Even there, he tried to reach Emma's eyes through the window, and she realized that if she stared too long, she might remember the man she thought she knew, not what she'd discovered that night. He looked away before that happened. The officer closed the door with a sharp thud, reverberating in the courtyard like the final period of a chapter. Another officer approached Emma to confirm some information. She answered objectively, without going into details, as if she knew she'd already told everything that needed to be said. As she spoke, she saw the tall investigator talking to Cole a few feet away. I couldn't hear, but the body language spoke volumes. Restrained gestures, short nods, a silent agreement on how to proceed from here. The second patrol car arrived to take away the collected evidence. Boxes, hard drives, the laptop, the black notebook, each item sealed and catalogued. The clock, locked at 3:40 a.m., was wrapped in clear plastic, and Emma felt a chill as she watched it disappear into the trunk of the patrol car, as if an ancient symbol were being removed from the scene. When everything seemed ready, the officer who had spoken to her pointed to the exit and told her she could go. Emma looked at the open gate, and for a moment felt a strange emptiness, as if by walking through it she were leaving behind not just this place, but an entire part of the life she knew. However, her feet moved forward, and the sound of her footsteps mingled with the distant rumble of traffic on the road. Cole approached her as she reached the car. "It's their turn now," he said, his voice deep but not triumphant. Emma simply nodded. He wanted to ask what would happen to Daniel, but the question died before it could take shape. What mattered wasn't his fate at that moment, but what she would do with the space that would open up ahead. As she got into the car, she noticed that the seat still held his coat, forgotten since the first hour of that night. She picked it up carefully, studying the fabric as if it were a map of mistakes and choices, and then left it on the back seat, not intending to take it with her. She started the engine, and the steady sound of the car made her realize that, for the first time in hours, there was nothing and no one trying to dictate her direction. In the rearview mirror, she saw Cole pull away toward the gate, his silhouette dissolving in the dim light of dawn. Emma took a deep breath, accelerated slowly, and turned onto Route 27. The landscape passed in a blur, but her mind was clear. She remembered every word spoken, every pause laden with intention, every detail that had revealed more than it should have. She felt the weight of karma not as revenge, but as adjustment, a silent realignment of things, one that doesn't restore what was lost but removes what was wrong. As he passed the sign marking the exit from the city, he realized there were no plans for the next step, and that this was somehow liberating. He let the radio play some music, ignoring the lyrics, and kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise timidly but steadily. For the first time since parking at 2:57 a.m. that morning, Emma felt like she was in her own time, no longer in the time set by others. And lightly touching her pocket, she found the key that had opened the shed, a cold metal that was now just a piece of evidence, but also a reminder that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed without leaving a mark. The sun had already broken the horizon when Emma pulled into a roadside gas station. She needed coffee, needed a moment to feel the world turn at a rhythm other than that of the dawn she had left behind. Inside, the place smelled of warmed bread and frying oil, the sound of cups clinking, and the low conversations between truck drivers. Upon entering, she realized that no one there knew who she was or what had happened a few hours earlier. This strange invisibility enveloped her like a blanket. She bought a strong coffee, sat by the window, and watched the cars pass by, each carrying stories she would never know. Daniel's forgotten coat was gone, but something about the touch of his hand in her pocket made her body tense. The key to the shed was still there. For a moment, he considered handing it over to the police, but the feeling was that this cold piece of metal still had something to say. He finished his coffee and continued on, taking the secondary road that wound through more remote areas. Along the way, he stopped at a narrow bridge, the river below reflecting a pale blue in the morning. He took the key from his pocket, ran his fingers over the scuff marks, and realized that, despite everything, this object was not just evidence. It was also a symbol, the embodiment of access to truths many preferred to keep hidden. He held it over the railing for a few seconds, feeling the cold wind, and then released it. The metal spun through the air until it disappeared into the water, taking with it the last physical link that bound her to that night. It wasn't an immediate relief, but an inner silence began to settle in. He continued driving, passing through small towns, until he reached one of those roadside markets where makeshift stalls sold everything from fresh fruit to dusty antiques. He walked slowly, touching the objects as if they were portals to other stories. He stopped in front of a stall selling antique clocks and saw, among the various models, one that made her stop breathing for a second. Hands stopped exactly at 3. He asked the vendor the price, who replied matter-of-factly that it was broken but still useful as a decorative piece. Emma didn't buy it, just stared until her discomfort gave way to a curious serenity. In that moment she understood that it didn't matter how many clocks showed that time. The true prison wasn't in the dial, but in the cycle it allowed itself to repeat. As she walked away from the stall, she felt a new lightness in her shoulders, as if each step was a reminder that she was no longer part of the pattern the notebook recorded. She got back in her car, and as she left the market, she saw in her rearview mirror a young woman approaching the clock stand, touching the same 3DAS model with a smile. Emma's heart raced for a moment, but then slowed. It wasn't her responsibility to save everyone. But deep down, she knew that what she had done that night might prevent that young woman from one day being just another name on a page. As dusk fell, he parked on a cliff overlooking the distant city. The lights were coming on, and she realized she could start over anywhere. The flash drive, still in her inner pocket, no longer had any practical value. The upload had completed, but keeping it was a physical reminder that she had once chosen to expose the truth rather than protect it. He took it out of his pocket, turned it between his fingers, and put it back. Not as proof, but as a symbol of the moment he decided to stop being a numbered lot. Night fell slowly, and the wind carried the scent of cold earth. Emma turned on her headlights and turned onto the road, leaving behind not only a town and a man, but also the version of herself. That accepted promises at 3 in the morning. In the rearview mirror, the world shrank, but in the windshield, the road stretched out, and for the first time, it was hers. Karma, satisfied, left no visible signs. Only the silent certainty that when the scales balance, there's no need for applause, just for the journey. If this story captivated you until the very last second, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Comment below. I don't accept promises at 3 in the morning, and tell me what you would have done in Emma's place. The next video is now live and will leave you breathless. Click and watch now before the truth arrives too late.